All right, so this is the penultimate Fridays at the Library for this semester. The ultimate one is next week on patent information. So if you have any questions about how you want to bring your invention to the market, we have a really great session for you next week at this time. But today we're going to talk about managing and sharing your research data. Whose office looks like this? Oh, Chris is like, yeah, it's kind of neat. So this is a very classic kind of image of, oh, that crazy person's got files all over the place out there, that person. Translate this to your online environment, or translate this to your file naming conventions, or translate this to, oh, I don't know, you've got a hard drive over here and you've got a zip drive over here, or we recently cleaned out some things from the library and we found a laser disc. It's like, okay, how are you going to manage all of this stuff that comes through so that you can use it like tomorrow? Do you remember what you did yesterday? So that other people can use it, and how do you preserve it for future scientists that will use your work in ways you don't even imagine? So here's kind of why we're here today, to talk about data management. So the overall goal of data management is to produce self-describing data sets, so that there's not intervention from you on having to say, well, actually, that column means this. Right? You want that written down somewhere so that someone else can figure it out. Right? Data are important. And today we're really going to focus on final data, not the sort of raw or intermediate data, the final data sets. So what kinds of data do you guys have that you need to manage? John, what kinds of data do you have?
Field trial and field trial.
Field trial data, what does that look like?
Both off the experimental station and also off the farm field.
Okay, farm field stuff, excellent.
Some of it's plot, some of it's spatial data.
Okay, geospatial data. Who has like a totally different kind of data than what John has? Yes?
What's orientation data collected in the field for orientation of features?
I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
Well, it's geological features.
Okay, geological features, other kinds of data. I'm sure School of Health Professions has different data types.
Oh yeah, we have a lot of behavioral data. We have,
So it's everything, right? And so this 1 hour session on data management with this variety of disciplines in here may or may not hit exactly what you're talking about. Because you think about, lots of people have genetic data. Lots of people have geospatial data. Lots of people have focus group data or interview data versus a variety of other kinds of things. So when we talk about data, I'm going to say data, and I want you to plug in your kind of data. It's kind of a broad brush look at this. Data management, obviously it benefits you and your collaborators. This is one of my favorite tweets of all time. This guy said, reproducibility is just collaboration with people you don't know, including yourself next week. And so as we think about data management, this is about, can you reproduce your science? Can you reproduce it with yourself a year from now? Can your student who picks up a project 2 years from now be able to continue something? So this is like for your own benefit. But then, of course, data management also benefits science and inquiry generally, so that other people can use your information and you can use other people's information to forward science. Just think of what's happening now with Zika. University of Wisconsin project basically said, we are just going to put out all of the Zika data that we get in real time. We are not going to wait for our journal publications. We're not going to wait for anything. We're just going to allow it to be publicly available so that other researchers can look at it, solve new problems, find new questions, and try to help in a public health emergency.
Yeah, I got a quick question.
Yes.
I mean, I love that idea, and it's interesting, and a lot of journals would say, okay, we're not going to publish this now. Do you have any idea where the implications of that and where that's going?
So the implications of kind of that duplicate publication aspect, I think really it does begin to change, and you get a lot of sort of like the archive preprint types of things that have built into it what they consider prior duplication. You do have to check individual journals right? Because nature, they're kind of picky about things, right? They're like, it has to come to us, or it's only to us and embargoed. And so I think you're absolutely right that there's cross purposes of how open you can be depending on where you want to place things, and know kind of what is your question, or what's the value that you're putting. For this, the Wisconsin researchers decided getting it out there as fast as possible was what they wanted to do.
So they probably haven't given up on it, but they don't know because no one's really done this much.
No one has done that much. Yeah. And if you look at their website, it's really nice because it has also gathered all of the publications that are open access about Zika virus and brought them all together. So it's really looking at what would an open access portal of this type of research look like, but it's not all of it. Good question. So you have all of these lovely benefits, and then of course there's always a little stick, and the stick is the money. So your federal agencies are asking you for data management plans, and your journals are asking you what you're going to do with your data, and a lot of times they are asking you to share your data. So we'll spend kind of most of our time talking about this aspect. And all of this sort of impetus for sharing of the publicly funded research comes from the OSTP memorandum of 2013, where they said if a federal agency gets more than $100 million in R&D, then those agencies have to make some plans. How are you going to make this information available to the public? The thought of it's taxpayer money, it needs to go out into the publicly available realm. And so one of the things that we've got for you on the library website page, we have a really nice data management plan LibGuide, and on the NSF Data Management Plan FAQ that I gave you, that URL is on the back of that. And what we've tried to do is bring together, okay, what are the different federal agencies requiring in terms of data management plans? You'll see that, and these are just the federal agencies, these don't include things like the Wellcome Trust or the Gates Foundation that will also have separate requirements for you. And so you'll see a lot of this now where, okay, the federal agency is requiring both the articles, where do you need to put your articles so that they're publicly available, and you can see they've got kind of, all right, it's PubMed Central, it's PubSpace, it's NSF Public Access Repository, and then they also have this information about the data repositories, which are a little bit more vague, right? They're like, as appropriate, put it somewhere. So that's the question is always like, what's appropriate, where am I going to go? But do look at your granting agency's requirements. On occasion, they will say, you need to put your data into X repository, and then that gives you the place to start. So the embargo means that it has to be available 12 months later. And so which in effect means that the journal articles, for example, don't have to be public access for that first year. And then after that, they must be open.
So the journal can still have their exclusive on
Yeah, I can talk about that forever. Like, that 12 months is really hurting libraries because we still pay for that journal those first 12 months, and then stuff that is a different Fridays at the library. And then you'll see lots of things from the different agencies. For example, NIH, it talks about data sharing is essential to expedite translation of research. Those of you who are more from the medical field side of things and the health profession side of things obviously know that one of the big things with NIH research is that you're often dealing with people and data about people. And so the sharing of data from the NIH side can often be very different from, say, the animal sciences side or from the plant sciences side, where you're not necessarily needing to de-identify everything on your plant genetics, but those interviews you really need to keep what needs to be private, keep that private. You also see things like the American Heart Association, like they specifically say, okay, it has to be in this particular repository within 12 months. So these are things that you'll see from your funding agency, and now more and more, and then of course the big one is the National Science Foundation, which probably has the most outlined data management plan overview. And so I like this just in terms of, it gives you a sense of what kinds of things you need to include in any kind of data management plan. It's a 2-page requirement, and you're looking for what types of data are you going to be collecting, what are your standards that you're going to be using, what's the metadata format that is kind of within the realm of your discipline, how are you going to let people access it, and how are you going to let people share it, and again, accounting for privacy and confidentiality issues if needed. How are you going to let people reuse this, redistribute it, and the products of those derivations? And then, of course, the bottom one, to me, just always screams the library, right? What are your plans for archiving your data? Oh my God, you have this whole thing in the middle of campus. It's like, we archive stuff. We archive stuff all the time. We can help you with that. But these are just good general questions as you're starting a project or you're working on your thesis or something of like, what is it that I am collecting? What kinds of metadata do I need to attach to that information right now? How am I going to let people access it, share it? How do I want people to reuse this data? So that's from the funding agency perspective. Also from just individual journals, you'll start to see this more and more often. So I don't know if anybody in here is published in PLOS One or has put any. Chris, do you have stuff in PLOS One? Probably. But they have a little statement that says refusal to share data and related metadata and methods in accordance with this policy will be grounds for rejection. It doesn't mean that they're saying you have to share all of your data. They're saying you have to explain why it would be that you're not sharing something. Again, if it's for human data, you need to explain that. I got a question recently from one of my veterinary faculty, because this was something new to her when she was putting it in. She's like, do I have data? Like, the whole question really tripped her up of like, what are you talking about, data? I said, well, what are you writing? She's like, well, I'm writing this case report. Did you take a temperature? She's like, yeah, we took some temperatures and we got some blood work back, and she had a whole table that had every single point of data that they had. And I said, you just have to say, there's no supplemental data. The data is within the manuscript. And so she's like, oh, okay. So you might start seeing these questions more and more often. Similarly, with the Dryad depository, which is does a lot of things with ecology journals, they expect if you are published in a particular set of journals that the data is going to be deposited into Dryad.
How do the data repositories get the resources to create all this?
They are often, usually started off, interestingly enough, often started out of grants, and they grow from there. A lot of times with the publication ones, for example, Dryad, they grew out of a grant, but then they need to be connected basically to the journals that are supplying that data, so that's how they're kind of moving forward. But it's a great question about sustainability of these.
Yeah. So is there a relationship between the journals and the databases that's other than just, I mean, is it kind of a two-way relationship or is it more one-way?
Well, I would say that it is two-way, because then the journals themselves know that they have a long-term repository where all of their items are going to be, and that they are not needing to host that within their publication platform. Because often you'll see, if you're looking at journals, you see this over on the side, like the supplemental materials things. I had a question one time where someone just couldn't get back into the supplemental materials. They're like, where is it? Where is it? And I finally had to contact the publisher. I'm like, this is gone. And they said, yeah, we keep that for 3 years. And I was like, that's not an archive, right? So what kind of repositories are there? It's a great question when you are looking to where should I put my stuff, to say, all right, what is the long-term health of this repository? There are some obviously excellent governmental repositories, all those NCBI databases, all of the NIH databases, those are long-term storage. We also have here at the library something called MOspace, which the library is committed to long-term storage. Our long-term time horizon is totally different than 3-year archive. We're like, no, we plan for hundreds of years. And one thing to know is that you can always kind of back up your data sets here at the library. So if you've got something where you're like, well, I know it does need to be in this repository or some other repository, but I want to make sure that it's also kept with the institution, you can kind of do that as well.
Is that within MOspace?
Yes, yes. And so MOspace, if you don't know, is the institutional repository for the University of Missouri. For those of you who are writing theses and dissertations, that's where your thesis is going to go. But we also take basically any type of kind of completed file. Again, we're looking at the done stuff. When you're still working on your data, you're more in Tim's area of the versioning and the over and over again. But those final data sets that are, for example, connected to a journal article can be placed in MOspace.
You have certain format requirements?
We don't actually. You can email the folks at MOspace and say, this is what I've got, and it's in this format. What can you do for me? And they just take that from there. Yes, is there any questions? No. I was checking.
There is, but not to you.
Well, that is true. Yeah. Oh. Hello. The bill collector is calling. And so what this graph is showing you is kind of you've probably seen these a lot, these sort of data life cycles about how things go around and around and around. Putting up your plans, collecting them, assuring them, describing them, preserving them, and sort of analyzing them. And so when we are talking specifically about those plans, what we've got up on that website is a couple of best practices for you on writing your data management plans. And do know that this is one thing that the libraries can consult with you. We're happy to read your data management plan to see if it kind of covers the various aspects. We obviously won't necessarily know anything about your research, but we can ask you those questions about what are your file formats, where are you going to archive this, how much stuff do you think you're going to collect. And one of the things that we've got on here as the first thing to think about when you're doing your data management plans is what types of data are being produced, and do you have the IT resources you need to collect the data. And so before you get too far into any project, you want to consult with your IT pro to say, this is what I want to do I have that ability? And then the other things you're going to be thinking about, what file formats are you using, what your naming conventions, how much data do you have, how long are you retaining things, who controls the data, who can use it, and in what fashion. We've got a couple of tips on here too. I had gone to a data management plan course, and they were funny, and they said, just tell people over and over again, read and then reread what the requirements of your funding agency are. And people, oh yeah, right, reread it. After you go through it, say, have I actually hit on all of those things? So I think one of the important things about all of these data management plans to remember is that they are peer-reviewed by the panel that you're giving it to. So there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer about sharing it or not sharing it, but you have to explain it to the panel that is going to be looking at it.
I got a call from our grants person that it was the day it was due, where she said, oh, you don't have a data management plan. It's new this year for that agency. So the panel won't know either.
But you got it together in time. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Would have been better if I did, so.
Yeah, it would have been better.
The panel will have a checklist. They'll know.
Yeah, and especially on those NSF ones, because they are looking for those. They're not necessarily looking for those things in that order. Like, you don't necessarily have to have a section that says type of data, although people tend to, because it's a whole lot easier to be like, oh, this is the type of data that I have. So they are going through there. I know it can be hard. That 2-page maximum can be kind of the difficult aspect. I know, Chris, if you can talk to that, of how you get around the 2-page part.
Well, the first time I had to write one for NSF, a big NSF project that had a lot of different kinds of data, and so I got all the information that I could about the requirements put it in there and then start going through it and removing non-essential work. You know, similar way that you write a proposal, to get your ideas down and then start cutting it down to fit the critical things in there.
Yeah, and if you do have a big section where that kind of methodology information or the is within the body of the grant, you can also refer to that in your data management plan of specifics on how we're gathering this type, because I'm sure that would happen a lot in your line of work where most of the grant itself is like how you're collecting things and that kind of thing. So the management plan can basically refer to specific areas within your grant to say, for this type of data collection, see A2 page 5 to kind of help with this problem. Because I think that's one of the, and you get why they do it, because they don't want to have to read 20-page data management plans, right? They want to see all this stuff, but it can be kind of hard to keep it within that 2-page item. So I've given away that I think that these data management plan, these are a little vague, and the person looking at one of these might be like, well, you need some more information. But often, actually these are real life examples. All files will be stored on PI's secure computer. All laboratory notebooks will be stored in PI's office. Okay. Is that appropriate for the kind of data that you're getting? Really hard to tell. Might not be the best way to save your data. And even a couple of things like, all sample data will be collected and organized using this particular software. Files will contain information about sample characteristics and conditions, and approximately 1 to 2 gigs of data will be generated. Okay, that's better, but it still doesn't really get to the point of things. And then this is one that you'll see in a variety of iterations. Data will be available to anyone who desires access. How? How exactly is that going to happen? Are you placing it somewhere? It'll be available online. In your institutional repository, in a federally funded repository, where are you putting things? So then you can see examples of things that have a little bit more fleshed out about, okay, this project is going to use an existing metadata standard. We're going to add these type of entries for our occupied community composition. Field notes taken during the time are collected and recorded. This type of software is going to be used, and we're generating a metadata file of EML. So then you can kind of get a sense of what's going to happen to those kinds of data. Similarly, this is an NIH example that talks very specifically about we're including data from approximately 500 subjects being screened for 3 different kinds of STDs from this type of clinic, and it talks about how things are going to be de-identified, and says even though the final data set will be stripped of identifiers prior to release for sharing, we believe that there remains a possibility of deductive disclosure, so we're making this sort of documentation available to the various communities. So you can get a sense of how much and how little specificity you need in kind of these data management plans. All right, so we're back to our little circle of life here, and we planned, and now you have to make sure you describe metadata, data about data, lets others discover and understand and use your data. I think the big important thing to know here is that you don't want to just slap on some metadata at the end of your project. Think about it beforehand, and it moves all the way through. You've got, and of course this will be very different depending on your discipline, but basic information that you've got about your data. What kind of data is it? Title, time, author, keywords. How does it relate to other items? Who owns the data? Who owns it? What kind of use permissions are there? Where did it come from? What versions do you have? You can go crazy with metadata. Actually, librarians love to go crazy with metadata. This is what our catalogers do all day long. But think about what's the software that you used to create that file, what data processing was performed, who collected the data, who's responsible for it, who sponsored it, why you collected the data in the first place, instrumentation and calibrations, units of measure. We've all heard those horror stories of things not landing on distant plants because, oh, metric, whoops. Any taxonomic data that you know that you need to give somebody. Also let people know what the known problems are to your data sets. It's really helpful when someone does that. It's like, well, we tried to perform this statistical analysis on it, and it doesn't work because of this. So don't do it. 5 years from now, it's still not going to work, or you're going to get the wrong answer if you tried to do that. And the other thing that it says below a little screen sharing is how to cite the data so that you can tell someone else, this is how I want you to cite that. The pro tip is to remember to put stuff in non-proprietary formats. We're doing this at the library right now. We're trying to open some old CD-ROMs. Wow, they're dead. And it's like, this item has a WordPerfect document on it. Great, I can't get to it anymore. So as you're working on your data, think about, okay, I don't necessarily want to trap everything into a Microsoft Office product. I want to save it. I need to also save things as TXT and kind of more open software items so that people can get to them down the line. Yeah.
I guess, I know that's helpful in the long term, but in the short term, I think for many people having an intent for some of the database or spreadsheets that are really very useful. I understand 50 years from now, my spreadsheets are really useful, but for some researcher, 5 years from now, they're going to be really happy if I send them a complex study.
You can create a CSV file.
You just export it from Excel, like in a time delimited Excel or one of those other formats, then it will work. You can still open it in Excel, but you can open it.
So CSV is considered pretty.
Yeah, that would be. Like on the metadata, also some people have known, like there's already known that metadata standards from their research community, so you would want to figure out if there is one, and then use that one.
Absolutely. So we've described the data, now we get to preserve the data, which also leads to discovery, because if you don't preserve it, nobody's going to be able to get to it later. And this we've talked a little bit about, that there are different kinds of data repositories. There are things that are domain repositories, so if you think about all of the NCBI databases that are available from the federal government, GenBank, so forth, those things, the data is all stored with similar items. Researchers in that area are really familiar with those repositories. There are subject-specific tools that have been developed, which kind of also goes back to John's point about, well, I want to be able to put it into this system so that all of the computational tools that are there can be used. So you've got domain repositories, and then you also have MOspace, the institutional repository. These are great, especially when there's not a specific subject repository that is appropriate for your data. Sometimes we refer to that as orphan data. You're like, oh, I've got this great thing. Doesn't really belong somewhere, but it's still an important item, and we'll preserve that, and it preserves the link with the institution. And this also goes back to the fact that sometimes domain repositories are awesome for 5 years, and then the grant's over, and then they kind of disappear into the ether. We've got a lot of, on our data management plan, LibGuide, we've got a lot of information about different kinds of repositories. If you're unfamiliar with them, you can kind of browse around or ask your subject specialist to see, okay, I've got this kind of data, where should it go? And then also that mention of if you've got some orphan data, then you can deposit that to MOspace Institutional Repository. And again, so here's the MOspace information. Really, just email the team to get things going, to say, hi, I have this kind of information, and I would like it into MOspace. What do I need to do? With just some basic information to let them know kind of how much, what file size are you talking about, and also is it being deposited into some place else as well, which is fine. Yes.
So you mentioned using MOspace as a backup, so you could do this progressively as you're organizing your data?
We think of MOspace, think of it as the library, so that you would actually put the final edition on the shelf and not, well, I'm halfway done. And they're like, we don't want your book yet. You know, we want your all
So
the
it's not
chapters.
just an incremental backup?
It's not the incremental backup. That would be more from research computing. We're looking at, this is the final data set that accompanied this particular journal article. That's what MOspace would be great at.
It's a backup in the sense that you're putting your final research data in a location that's going to be there for a long time. The journal goes away, your university website goes away, you still have this, your important what you did at this location.
Yeah.
I actually, we put our policies and things like that up there, so it'll be there for a long time.
And it's great, again, if you're if you have a thesis coming out anytime and you want your data files that are associated with your thesis, then put them in MOspace with your PhD, and then it's kind of as one bundle. People have used MOspace in their data management plans. You know, they've got this little bit of orphan data that they know that they're going to put in here. So here and on the data management plan guide, we've got some just boilerplate information for you if you need something to kind of put into your plan. What we have found over the years is that, wow, this takes up a lot of room, that's way too long. You know? So as Chris was saying earlier, sometimes you don't have a paragraph to explain that, but you can say this type of data will be deposited in MOspace Institutional Repository of the University of Missouri. And that will often give someone who's reading it to know, okay, yes, this is backed by the university, and this is kind of a, all of these MOspace or DSpace institutional repositories are very well known across the country.
You may have already answered this question, but MOspace is completely open access. We often have data that can be shared, but needs to be vetted by the PI first.
So we do have some controls on MOspace so that, for example, it can be open to anybody just with a click. It can also be restricted to University of Missouri system, so you have to log in with your credentials. It can be restricted to the MU campus. I don't know if we have anybody that has it set up in terms of, if you want to look at this, contact me, simply because for the long term, that often doesn't work. You know, like, oh, and that, you know, that researcher leaves and that sort of thing. Jeanette, do you know? Yeah.
I'm just curious, because we have people that have the identified data that have, but they still have concerns about it.
Okay, I'll ask our MOspace person.
I have a question. So if I have students that have dissertations in the doc, and I have the data, and I can still contact those students, can we add those to the folder? They're already there.
Yeah, if you've got kind of the, here is the data set that goes with that, that would be great.
I found when you require your students, they know that they're going to do that at the end, they handle the data a little bit differently. Because they know that they're going to have to go from their dissertation writing process to getting their first job. That's going to take a finite amount of time, and they know the complexity of cleaning up their mess. Do it otherwise.
So you may want that as standard
And I
practice.
started having, I mean, I have dissertations that are not in MOspace, but they're all on paper too. So.
I'm going to move a little bit from, okay, you've created all of these things and it's solved Zika and you've done all these wonderful things. And talking a little bit about giving appropriate credit for other people's data and also claiming your work as your own. How many in this room have an ORCID ID? Ooh, oh, what do you like about your ORCID ID, Ms. Elmick?
I don't know. I was just required to get one when I submitted a paper to NAR.
It's funny because we are finding that more about it.
sometimes.
And how about you? What do you think? So what it is a way for people to claim anything, their articles, their data sets, their posters, their conference proceedings, and then it's all tied to a unique identifier number. My name is Catherine Marie Anderson. I believe there is more than one Catherine Marie Anderson. And so it's also a way for us to disambiguate between different KM Andersons to say this is her body of work versus this is her body of work. If you set these up early, especially in your professional career, it means that all of your work can basically be brought together and moved through as one. Say, okay, this is my stuff. If you think you may or may not change your name in the future, it connects that as well. That can often happen to researchers where they're now publishing under another name and people are like, I had no idea that was the same person. You'd be like, yes, the ORCID can kind of connect you that way. ORCID IDs are free. As you have mentioned in this room, they're being required more and more often. And you're like, oh, geez. And I know my husband, even when he wasn't submitting something, he was just reviewing something. And in order to review, they said, what is your ORCID ID? But it was a way to say, you can actually kind of claim that contribution too, like I'm a reviewer for X journal. And you'll see these when you are searching in things like Scopus and Web of Science. You'll see people's individual numbers, and that's a way to kind of say, well, let me bring all of their stuff together as that person's. So these are great for data sets because often, it's really easy to track down a journal article, but maybe not necessarily the data set that's next to it. Also, as you're kind of doing these things, think about what the licensing is on this. You'll see this a lot of either an open data license that basically says you can use this however you want. Sometimes you'll see these as Creative Commons 0 licenses. A lot of times when you are, for example, putting your data into a repository, that is one of the conditions. Like when you put your data into the Dryad repository, it says, when you do this, we are going to apply the CC0 license on it so that other people can reuse this data and do something else with it. Earlier this year, the New England Journal of Medicine had a really interesting editorial about the sharing of clinical data, and they talked about those who take clinical data and reuse it and do different analyses on it. They talked about them as research parasites and saying, well, the original person who did that study should always be a co-author on that later. And so some people took that as the way that science works, actually, is you put the information out there, other people come along, ask a different question, see a different thing, and do different analyses on it. So now this group that was not too thrilled with that editorial came up with the Parasite Awards to celebrate rigorous secondary data analysis to kind of say, all right, this is a legitimate science to look at big data sets and put them together in different ways to answer new questions. That said, if you are using someone else's data set, you need to say so. You need to be able to cite it just as you cite a journal article. I know a lot of people get tripped up. They're like, well, how do I cite this thing? Think of it as a publication. Who wrote it? What is the title of it? Where did it come from? When was it published? Does it have a DOI so that someone else can get back to it? And check your style manual. A lot of style manuals now will have sections on how do you cite a data set. So the example that I have here is from APA, and they've got a section in their manual about what are the minimum requirements. And you can see there, it's got all the things that you would normally see. It's got the author, it's got the year, it has the title, and then in the square brackets it says, this is the data file and code book. So someone who is reading that can say, oh, okay, that's not a journal article, but that's kind of the data set itself. And the APA also has a more extended one if you want to give additional information on that. That has the producer information and those sorts of things. And what I like is when you're actually looking at a data set online and it says, hi, here's how you can cite this. I'm like, oh, well, that's even easier. I've got all of the parts on there. So this, again, is from the Dryad Data Repository. And they say, okay, when you use data from here, cite both the original publication and cite the data package. And so that's how they suggest doing those kinds of things. Because you do not want to get the LEGO academics mad at you. Love the LEGO academics. So they were mad because they discovered their research results posted online without appropriate attribution. And so you want to make sure as you're using other people's work that you are citing it appropriately, just as you would want someone else to cite your work appropriately.
One of the things I'm not very looking at, you talk about citing the paper and the data set. And I'm looking at some stuff here from the USDA where they're talking about basically just citing the data set. Are there quite a few data sets going up that aren't attached to papers?
It can really depend, because there are some journals that are in effect now just basically data set journals. So you'll see those kind of scientific reports. So I think that the Dryad one very particularly wants to connect those two things together. If you're looking at this, it means that you've looked at both the publication and the data set, because those things are kind of in there together. But you're actually right. Like if you are looking at the data set and you never look at the journal article, don't cite the journal article because you haven't actually looked at it.
There can be data sets where they never have articles. So I was reading data policies, and there's like one, the Idaho EPSCoR project has a data policy where they want people to submit their data to be submitted to repositories as soon as possible, and so then the repository gives you a DOI. And then whenever somebody uses it, they cite the DOI, and so that's the way they get around making sure people get cited for the work before it's published. But yeah, it was pretty confusing to me.
I think I'll end with just know that there's a lot of information out there for you for your specific questions. As I kind of said at the beginning, the MU Libraries works with the research computing folks, and we work with the OSPA folks. Often it sort of takes a village, as we are in this election season, to kind of pull all of this stuff together and make sure that you have the resources that you need. But if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and if I can't answer something, then I will find the right person who can. Other questions? Yes.
On MOspace,
yes.
Do you have an example of the data sets that's there that you can look at?
Yes. I will now need Hannah to flip this around. And really the data sets that we have on there are basically Excel files, that they're not these enormous things, but they have all of the metadata attached to them, and they also have, they don't have DOIs, but they have handles, and so they have permanent URLs that you can then, if I'm citing this, I can just have this one link and someone else is going to get back to it. All right, now I have to remember. I think I could just give some. I can't. Oh, it's funny. I have it on a list in my office, which doesn't help me. Can't remember if this is one. And see so on here, and Chris was talking about this a little bit earlier, there's some metadata conventions. One of the ones that we use is called Dublin Core, so that's at DC. So here's a DC type of a data set itself, and that these are output files showing optimal network configurations. Here is the handle that's not ever going to change, so you can always get back to that. And then it's a matter of these various zip files. And then it's got, I don't even know what a GDX file is. And somewhere on here we would want the README to say this is what, these were produced with this kind of a thing, and this is what this is.
Other questions?
So I realize one more question, which is, again, on today, so we've also had a project where we're working with either modelers instead of parameterization files for,
Okay.
and there's also model queries and around. And so I guess I'm kind of curious, if this system work for something like that, where you would, I guess, public access model, so it's not like the code itself is, basically to reproduce what you would have to take our version of the model to conclusions and parameterization set together. So would the MOspace be an appropriate place for that?
Seems like it would, as long as like you wrote information about it.
Yeah. I would
You
think
can
so.
write like a text file that's, can you write, people can write?
Yeah, people could, because you can have text files on there.
Just
Um,
writing information
No,
about it.
it's it's really the model is the EXE.
Yeah.
Well, you need the source.
But then, like, if you just say that you just can just write a few sentences about what it is, so that, I don't know, whatever somebody who might use it would need to know, to use it.
Right, well, that would be, I was wondering if that's a kind of thing we could go in, because you have that one, and so something, probably just data and something like that, people like just.
No, that's great. Because you could take all the same data and you come up with a version 5 years from now of the same model and with different outputs and someone.
And it might not run on your computer.
There is one problem with that is, I had PSE produced 25 years ago. Because they were on a different version of so it's, what you may want to do is actually put the code there so that it can be used by your reprogramming.
But it's still, oh, you mean like, not meaning not allowed to then, but not allowed to.
Oh, from where you're taking it
Yeah,
from.
but there's a difference between two of them, with you taking version of whatever they put in there.
Well, and the big problem is the EXE will work for a while until the operating system changes enough that it doesn't.
Then you gotta put the operating system in there too.
Then it becomes
In most
a problem.
cases. So is there anything that, your campus computing, did you say?
Research computing.
Research computing. Is there anything that you guys do that we should know about related to this?
In terms of, working with the intermediate data sets, I run the campus cluster. We have some tools to track source code and versioning and things like that. If you're familiar with Git, we have a Git repository. So we can do things with that. We provide a lot of storage space. So you can get, we just lowered the campus price for general purpose research storage. It's $7 per terabyte per month.
How often does that happen? They lowered the cost.
30%, and we have some product for people that are in bioinformatics as well. So if you know you're going to need 200 terabytes for 5 years, we have some good cost-effective ways of doing it.
Thank you.
So I guess on the so in terms of longevity, just so the MOspace is considered library system is saying we will maintain that or transition that. That's a commitment to the institution.
Yeah, as the institutional repository of, we will keep your thing. But again, if you put up an EXE file, we're not necessarily going to take care of that and go like, oh.
But I'm saying that the institution is MOspace is a they're committed that 20 years from now that will be
I will let Jeanette say absolutely yes.
It's a partnership between IT and the libraries. Yeah, it's a partnership between IT and the libraries. With the library sort of managing the day-to-day operations of it, and really just the metadata and working with individuals to consider. But it is, yes, it's a, so, you know, you really can't promise eternity. we are saying that this will be an ongoing static location where materials can be turned to.
Well, actually, is there a system that would allow you to notify somebody's downloaded your data set?
As a matter of fact, yes. And so within MOspace, there are some abilities to sort of track the statistics of it so that you can see, oh, this was used so many times, and it will also even give you the map of, and this person was in Iowa that downloaded that. So yeah, there are statistical packages within this to see just how often things are used.
I've got one more question, which is the agency that I've worked with the most just started just now requiring data management plans, but I see here that NSF started in 2011. So what I'm wondering is, has anyone completed a grant on a data management plan in the room?
I've done the NSF, but I think I did one for USDA. I can't remember. I just say something about data for USDA, but I don't.
I don't mean completed,
but like got the grant and then did.
The grant is completed and the data management plan is executed.
Oh, we're like, one reason why I'm here is trying to figure out how to execute the plan.
I guess anyone who was in that category wouldn't be here.
Yeah, I mean, if the project is still, like, you know, when you write your data management plan, there is like a lot of stuff that you're cautious about because you really like you haven't done it before, right?
Right.
So that's the reality is that, you know, they kind of made this requirement and then all of a sudden you have to figure it out. So it does take a while to figure out. Like we can't. So I said a lot of stuff about repositories, but we have some really big data sets, really big, too big to put it in MOspace that there is still, I can't find a repository for it. So I said, you know, I said a lot of stuff about we'll look for repositories. And, you know, a thing that I don't like about it is we didn't get any comments specifically back on the data management plan. So you get reviewed on everything else, but nobody tells you if the data management plan was good or bad.
Well, we didn't know what that
I mean, I guess it passed because it got funded, but yeah, and so, yeah, so.
I guess to answer your question, which you asked me in terms of that context,
Yeah.
So if you have a bunch of work that's automated, we can help you with targeting the output of that automation to a place like hooking it up directly to MOspace. So if you're having a whole bunch of files you want to publish on MOspace, we can work on developing those connectivity, putting it to something like S3 online, building those tools that do those contracts as well.
So they could go to MOspace, find it. It wouldn't physically be there because it's not big enough to hold it.
Oh, it would. Well, in her case, you would publish the metadata, and then you could publish links to the actual raw data. Or, you know, if you have a database of material and you want to kind of make it public, you can work on ways of connecting the interfaces between, you know, that and the website, so it would be automatic publish because they have APIs.
Hey.
Are you now a repository now?
No, we have some large storage space for our project, but that didn't solve the problem of making it publicly available. And so maybe we did something like that. Some of our data, so we have Zalk radar data. There's not actually, you know, it's coming in every 5 minutes constantly. There's not a real repository for it because, you know, just think if there's a repository for all the Zalk radar data that's out in the world, it's just too much. Doesn't make sense, but NSF funded, so.
And there might be some data scavengers that might be interested.
Yeah, but so, but it's kind of like, where do we put it, especially after we don't have funding anymore to maintain it, but we're expected for it to be maintained somewhere.
Well, that's a good project for the Data One site, which does a lot of geospatial
We
stuff.
seem to be able to buy the space just like buying a cemetery plot.
That's what I was
You can
hoping.
do that already. It just costs a lot of money.
I want to mention, involved with a project that's funded by Missouri Department of Conservation. Their project is nominally a 100-year project. We're already 25 years into it. And there's a lot of data, and we've been struggling with ways to organize it and archive it and do metadata and all that. The good and bad parts of what we've done. It's a work in progress.
Well, you got 75 more years.
It won't be me.
I guess are there workshops related to, I mean, I guess I'm wondering, if there's this workshop on this project, are there other working groups or workshops related to data management?
We're planning on bringing software carpentry and data carpentry to the campus. There are 2-day workshops that teach grad students and faculty how to manage their data, how to program, from basically the ground up. There's a lot of tools for data manipulation. It's more of an introductory thing, but it brings in a lot of concepts on different approaches to treating data as a pipeline as opposed to something that you can do.
How are you going to announce this?
On my blog, Research Computing, and I'll put it up to the CI Council as well.
And you'll send it to the library.
The library will also. Yeah.
You'll send it out at the, yeah,
So that's still a work in process. We're trying to get some people trained to be trainers, so we can train the trainers.
Excellent. Thank you, everybody, for coming this afternoon. Thanks for your questions.